Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to contribute to this extremely important debate as we look at fiscal appropriations for 2024. Let me first commend the member for Saparia, leader of the opposition, for a very well, clean, clinical delivery in terms of her response to the Minister of Finance budget presentation. It was direct, Madam Speaker, and purposeful on the day of the delivery. I also wish to commend all my colleagues on the side who have contributed in their specific way, under their specific portfolios, which they have done so with precision and exactitude. Madam Speaker, I am proud to say that it is this side of the House which continues to fight for and defend the interests of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and just not the chosen few. I rise today, Madam Speaker, as a Member of Parliament for Mayaro, representing the hard-working citizens of a constituency which desperately wanted Budget 2024 to speak to the issues that matter to them. Madam Speaker, issues such as job creation, better infrastructure, better roads, access to reliable water supply, better educational opportunities for their children, flood management, school transportation. Most especially, they wanted to hear what was being done to combat the explosion of violent crime, which has our fellow citizens across our nation living in daily fear for their lives. Madam Speaker, most ministers of finance would judge the success of a budget presentation by how it improves the quality of life for the citizens they serve, but not this one. In Trinidad and Tobago, where a government has inflicted unrelenting hardship over the past 8 years, you would expect the Minister of Finance to ease the burden of living by reducing taxes, taming the cost of food and medicine, and returning communities to safe zones. Madam Speaker, these are not unreasonable demands. Far from it, Madam Speaker. Indeed, they are the very basic items that is being demanded by every citizen here in Trinidad and Tobago, from Mayaro to Chaguanas to Charlottesville. Sadly, Madam Speaker, Budget 2024 addresses none of these critical issues comprehensively, which everyone in our nation is concerned about. A national budget, Madam Speaker, is more than just an Excel spreadsheet of allocations to various ministries. A national budget is a blueprint of national priorities. It is a vision that charts a way forward for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Not only does it just set the way forward to achieve our dreams, but rather it inspires us in the very act of collectively dreaming for a better nation, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a national budget should be a fight for a better future for every citizen. But this budget was not a fight for a better future. It was an act of national surrender, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this budget was a surrender of our national hopes and dreams. This government have surrendered on crime. They have surrendered on flooding. They have surrendered on infrastructure. They have surrendered on the economy. The only thing left to surrender is government by calling the elections now. Madam Speaker, this budget is telling the people of our nation, you are condemned to a sick economy where mass joblessness is normal, where runaway crime is normal, where collapsed infrastructure is normal, where dry taps is a way of life. This budget, Madam Speaker, is telling those who are dreaming of starting their own businesses to give up. The red tape and bureaucracy is not worth it. This budget is telling our young people to forget about the digital economy and the coming revolution of artificial intelligence. Instead, just focus on trying to live day by day. This budget is telling us that our only national dream is to dream of a government-sponsored, issued food box. Madam Speaker, allow me for a couple of minutes just to share a story. I would like to take a moment to share a story that reflects the aspirations and dreams of so many people in our beloved country. Madam Speaker, my parents, like many of our fellow Trinbagonians, started their journey from humble beginnings in Mayaro. My grandfather took my grandmother and their four children from Faizabad and brought them to Guayagorari with 2 grip and $100 in their pockets. My grandparents rented a small house for $5 a month. My grandfather took advantage of the early development of the oil sector and offered himself as a road builder in the Tisoro fields. And during that time, my grandmother opened a little parlor, which she started a little business. Eventually, my father, he too became a dedicated policeman, and my mother continued with the shop, with the parlor and the shop, and it grew out into a successful business. It was their dedication, Madam Speaker, coupled with the opportunity to access the tools to start small business that allowed them to grow and send my siblings and I to school. It was through their efforts that created a dream for a better life for themselves and their children that I was able to continue my studies and form my own businesses. But Madam Speaker, I am acutely aware that my story is not unique. There are countless individuals in our nation with dreams and ambitions, eager to contribute to the growth and diversification of Trinidad and Tobago. The success of my family and many like ours was made possible because they had the confidence in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, they had the confidence that their dreams were achievable, that their vision could be accomplished, that their hard work would benefit their children and their grandchildren. It is my view, Madam Speaker, that this is precisely the role of a national budget, to provide all of our citizens with the tools and the resources they need to pursue their dreams. Our citizens, Madam Speaker, do not want a handout. All they are asking for is for the state to give them a hand up and a fighting chance, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we must recognize that fostering economic growth and diversification cannot be achieved through top-down policies alone. It requires an unwavering commitment to empowering our citizens at the grassroots level. Small and medium-sized enterprises are the backbone of our economy, and they need more than just lip service in the budget. We need initiatives that make it easier for aspiring entrepreneurs to access funding, receive training and mentorship, and navigate the bureaucratic hurdles that often stifle their potential. We need targeted investments in education and skill development to equip our workforce for the challenges of the 21st century, not a Vike approach, Madam Speaker. Budget 2024 should have been a beacon of hope, a blueprint for a brighter future for all Trinbagonians. It should have laid out a comprehensive plan to provide access to the tools and opportunities needed to realize the hopes and dreams of our people. Madam Speaker, over the last 8 years, this government has developed the unfortunate habit of calling anyone who disagrees with them unpatriotic. When my colleagues on this side express genuine concerns over government policy, they get accused of wanting this government to fail. Let me say this today quite clearly, Madam Speaker. As a patriot of Trinidad and Tobago, no one on the sides of this House wants our nation to fail. My children, as well as the children of my colleagues opposite, all have to live in this country together. When this government fails, it means our country fails. It means the dreams of all of our children fail. We on this side, Madam Speaker, will continue to question this government and raise our concerns where we see it, not because we want the government to fail, but because we want the children of Trinidad and Tobago to succeed. Madam Speaker, one might have expected a Minister of Finance to address pressing issues like poverty, failing infrastructure, and economic diversification, runaway and rampant crime, the issues of flooding, food insecurity. Yet, Madam Speaker, the Minister seems to define success merely by the absence of new taxes, a view that reveals the disconnection from the needs of the people of this country. The morning after the Minister's budget presentation, the Minister touted the lack of new taxes as an achievement, ignoring the broader, more complex challenges that face our nation today, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this illustrates a troubling lack of imagination and vision in the halls of power in Trinidad and Tobago. The Express newspaper, Madam Speaker, aptly termed this budget lacking imagination, innovation, and respect. The key word, Madam Speaker, to me was respect. They have disrespected the intelligence of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It was a disorganized approach with no clear objectives or accountability, no plans for poverty alleviation, crime reduction, or business improvement were provided. In essence, Madam Speaker, this is a budget without purpose or vision, reminding us of the biblical warning that where there is no vision, the people perish. Madam Speaker, allow me an opportunity now to make a few comments on some items that were raised by members who, on the other side, who presented. And I wish to just raise some issues on some of the comments that were made. The member for San Fernando East, Madam Speaker, have two opening batsmen in terms of pieces of commentary that I have heard the honorable member used on a number of occasions. The first one being that Trinidad and Tobago continues to be the best and one of the only investment-grade countries in the Caribbean. Now, I have no argument with that position, but I would ask the question, if we are so, where is the lineup of investors waiting to come into Trinidad and Tobago? And the investors that I am asking about is the ones who can invest serious foreign direct income into this country. Where are them? Madam Speaker, the second batsman that the member for San Fernando East puts out on the pitch is the fact that Trinidad and Tobago is one of the only countries that have not gone into the IMF hands. And that is a good thing. I don't argue with that point. But Madam Speaker, if one were to read the Article 4 report of May 2023, there's a section in fine print, not the headlines. I like to read the fine print. And the fine print identifies certain things that the government must address if they wish to accomplish the projections that have been made in that IMF Article 4 report. Madam Speaker, these are the things that they are asking the government to do. Deal with your revenue authority. That's an IMF suggestion. Deal with your utility rates. That's an IMF suggestion. Deal with property tax. That's an IMF suggestion. Deal with the reorganization of WASA. That is an IMF suggestion. Deal with NIB reform. That is an IMF suggestion. So while we haven't signed on the line for the IMF, these are the precursors that they are following. So we are there across the line, but we're in front of the door. Madam Speaker, this is the only government that I have heard prefers to beat their chest by borrowing money. They borrow money and beat their chest that we get money at good rate. But I haven't heard any chest beating for any business opportunity that would put us back on the map of the early 2010-2015, when Trinidad and Tobago was described by the LA Times as a tiger in a sea of pussycats. Madam Speaker, when we are looking at the NIB, which is a very contentious issue, Madam Speaker, one just has to look at what's happening in Europe, in France more so, with this very same issue of the adjustment to the retirement age. I have to ask honorable ministers of finance if they have looked at options rather than moving the retirement age. Have we looked at increasing the contribution system in the NIB? Because, Madam Speaker, for years, there have been a call to bring in domestic workers inside of that catchment. There are over 50,000 young men and young women who serve as domestic assistants throughout homes throughout the country. Can the NIB look at bringing a classification to bring those people on board? Madam Speaker, what about the option of bringing small business owners? Have a classification for them that we can bring in more contributions into the NIB system. And Madam Speaker, the numbers in terms of the Venezuelans who are in this country, it is well known, it is well far beyond the 17 or 18,000 that is registered. Can't we find a mechanism of bringing on what we determine, or what most of these agencies determine, is close to 80, 90, or even 100,000 Venezuelans on this island? Get them into the productive sectors, get them into national insurance contribution system, and let's see if we can bridge that gap, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Trade spoke a little while ago, and I want to address one or two items. The minister used the opportunity to outline a number of improvements throughout the sector. And I have no argument with that data, Madam Speaker. I am happy for the pace of growth, albeit a little slow. I am happy for the improvements throughout the sector. But, Madam Speaker, we must not lose the sight that with all the 5% and 2% and 6% scattered all over, our economy is 17.5% shrunk in GDP from 2015 to today. So we have a lot of catching up to do, Honourable Minister. I know that is a hard-working minister, and she will continue to work with all the players in the sector to drive the system forward, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the presentation by the Honourable Minister, which was led off by the Minister of Finance in his highlighted component under the trade sector, really was more what I would determine as a wash, rinse, and repeat. Because there was nothing new, there was nothing innovative, nothing inspirational. It was a continuation of a lot of projects and programs that have been issued and continuing over the last couple of years, and nothing is wrong with that. Nothing is wrong with that. But when we are coming to a budget in a critical time that we're in here in Trinidad and Tobago, and the desire of a population who wants to be lifted, there was nothing lifting the population there, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister indicated that there was good percentage growth in certain sectors, 17% in some, 21% in some, 18% in some. But one only has to take note that the data is from 2021 to now. I can tell you, Madam Speaker, that I believe that that increase that the minister was responding to had very little to do with government policy. It had more to do with the sectors that were in slumber post-COVID. So these industries woke up in 2021, and when you're at the bottom, the only place that you can go is up. So we expect these industries to perform well. And we are glad that they are performing well, Honourable Minister. And again, we look forward to see their continued growth as the months and the years proceed. Madam Speaker, the Minister spoke about the diversification drive in several sectors, and Honourable Minister queried the Leader of the Opposition's remark that very little was done in terms of the diversification drive in her delivery last Friday. But it begs to wonder, Madam Speaker, if, according to Honourable Minister, that there is a fair amount of diversification in our economy, which Honourable Minister is satisfied with, then why it is in every international report, be it the IMF, Article 4, World Bank report, ECLAC, why it is every single one is saying and suggesting to the government of Trinidad and Tobago that we ought to be doing more in terms of our diversification drives, Madam Speaker. If, according to the Minister, we are doing reasonably well, why are these international agencies pressing in order for us to maintain what they believe is our growth trajectory? We must address these things in terms of our diversification. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister spoke about 60 billion in terms of private sector borrowing. Couldn't recall if you said 60 million or 60 billion. But I suspect there would have been a fair amount of private sector borrowing, Madam Speaker, for the mere reason that this government has held on to $7 billion in VAT refunds. Madam Speaker, you know what VAT refund is? VAT refund is your working capital from your overdraft sitting in the government's coffers. So what you as a business have to do now, if you want to drive your growth plans or your growth policy, you now have to fill that gap in terms of getting that money that was supposed to be in your working capital. So you now have to go to the commercial banks and borrow money if you want to achieve that. So, Madam Speaker, I'm not saying all of it would have been for that, but $7 billion in working capital, not in your bank account, it is a big hit. And if you want to continue your business, you would have had to go find that money somewhere, more than likely in the commercial banking system. So, Madam Speaker, despite a litany of promises, this government has continually failed to implement meaningful changes, be it the Gambling Commission, the agricultural sector, or the National Insurance Board, as I now referred to. The minister's budget presentation, titled Building Capacity for Diversification and Growth, conspicuously lacked any discussion in the Minister of Finance delivery on Friday about key areas of diversification, a glaring omission given our depleting hydrocarbon resources. One would have thought, since the budget was named Building Capacity for Diversification, one would have thought that that would have been the key focus or the key anchor point that all other measures would have been hooked onto for the entire 4 hours and 7-minute presentation, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, international lending agencies like the IMF and the World Bank have urged and continues to urge economic transformation, but the government has not acted seriously on these calls. Madam Speaker, this lack of action extends to sectors like tourism, agriculture, which have been discussed for years, year after year after year, with no tangible steps. I'm not saying baby steps aren't happening, but nothing that really changes your line and length as a country to move into some transformational way, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the tourism sector in particular, it remains stymied by international travel warnings due to crime. Our agricultural sector, that could significantly reduce our $7.3 billion food import bill. And Madam Speaker, if you juxtapose that to the $5.1 billion projected budget deficit, the government has been equally inert, reversing previous gains made in the food production and farmer support. Madam Speaker, this is a governance marked by a lack of political will, initiative, and enabling the investment environment. Madam Speaker, I thus challenge the government to set clear, measurable targets for domestic food production and import reduction. We cannot afford to continue with the lack of specificity and accountability. Madam Speaker, let me just turn quickly to manufacturing. I know the Honourable Minister who spoke before me went and said quite a bit of manufacturing. We in the opposition here, we commend the non-energy manufacturing sector for its resilience and growth. Its quick recovery post-COVID-19 and its increased exports from 2.1 billion to 2.4 billion within a year is very commendable. But Madam Speaker, they do have an ambitious goal to doubling their exports by 2025, and the government intervention or their continued intervention will be essential. Madam Speaker, the key areas for support should include incentivizing the sector further, pushing the trade agreements which the Honourable Minister spoke to shortly a while ago, ensuring equitable foreign exchange supply, and cutting the bureaucratic red tape. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, to the manufacturing sector, this $7 billion VAT refund, and every time this matter is raised and it comes up and we pay $1 billion or we pay $2 billion, by the time the cycle comes around and the payments are made, it goes back up again. So like we're in this never-ending catchment of this $6 or $7 billion VAT refund issue. I do believe, Madam Speaker, that the reforming of the VAT system into a sales tax system is overdue. I know many of the business chambers have asked the Minister to take a serious look at that matter. Madam Speaker, another issue that the Minister of Trade touched on very, very briefly was the issue around the illicit trade in terms of counterfeit products coming into the island. Madam Speaker, that is a severe issue, and it is helped along by the inefficiency in the port operations, the lack of adequate scanning technology. I know the Minister of Finance have indicated a $90 million input into some new scanners. Again, I've heard that scanner issue for the last 2 or 3 years. I do hope and I pray that we get the scanners this time and we could deal with these issues. Madam Speaker, just on the point of the illicit trade, one of the biggest financing for terrorist organizations worldwide is counterfeit items, Madam Speaker. Having spent a month at the Marshall Center in Germany in 2017, Madam Speaker, I was amazed at how simple purchasing counterfeit CDs, shoes, handbags, how that money ends up in the financing of terrorist organizations, Madam Speaker. So it will be imperative not only to help our local business who have agencies for these products in the country, that we will be doing a lot more to arrest the issue of terrorist financing globally, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, SMEs, the Minister mentioned SMEs that that the Honourable Minister will deal with when Minister goes to the upper house. But they are indeed powerful economic houses of economic growth and innovation, but they continue to struggle under this administration. Again, Madam Speaker, what we're asking on this side for is for targeted support. And this targeted support is necessary to overcome the financial challenges and to spur employment. Madam Speaker, in this country, we need to put people to work. We need to get people to work. I do not think that 3.7% in terms of the unemployment figure is real. I don't know how the data is arrived at, but we feel it differently in the constituencies which we operate in. I do believe the government needs to step up its game to fully harness the potential of our non-manufacturing sector, energy manufacturing sector. Madam Speaker, quickly, ease of doing business. I know, again, Honourable Minister said she would address this in the upper house, but I've been hearing these promises since 2020, when the Minister of Finance himself came to this house and he identified key critical issues in the ease of doing business, such as the 3.5-year wait to enforce contracts and a 254-day to secure a construction permit. These actions, Madam Speaker, remains unfulfilled up to today. Trinidad and Tobago's global ranking, as cited in the World Bank 2020 report, remains a sticking point for our investors or foreign investors. Madam Speaker, the World Bank report of 2020 identified 5 significant challenges that the country must address going forward. The issue of corruption, foreign exchange controls, crime, low productivity, and government bureaucracy. Madam Speaker, they continue to remain unaddressed as of today. Meanwhile, Madam Speaker, the only ranking where Trinidad and Tobago is rising under this government, it seems to be crime, and I understand that we are number 6 per capita. Madam Speaker, recently, Mr. Takwe Dax Driver, the CEO of the Energy Chamber, he shed some light on the regulatory hurdles. Madam Speaker, he confirmed that there are 33 sequential approvals that is needed from 8 ministries just to proceed from a bid to first gas production. Mr. Driver, August 22nd, 2023, in the Express newspaper, he called out the system for its inefficiency, stating, we need to get to the bottom of why things are taking so long. So if we can't address those issues, Madam Speaker, how are we going to push for our energy sector to go forward? And if these are issues by any other investor, that is going to be challenging for the country in the long term, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, he also highlights the outdated paper-based decision-making process, lamenting that there are missing files and bureaucratic delays. And when we are having this in the energy sector, I can only imagine what is happening outside of that. Madam Speaker, I want to ask a question concerning foreign currency repatriation. And Madam Speaker, this is a key issue that was made by the Minister of Finance in his delivery last Friday. And if I were to draw your attention, Madam Speaker, to page 37 of the budget statement, which reads, we intend to move aggressively to develop strategies to increase the repatriation of foreign exchange earned overseas by local and foreign businesses operating in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Madam Speaker, I have not heard the Minister explain exactly what that means. So I would ask, and I'm asking, and perhaps when the Minister is winding up, if he can answer one question from my presentation, if he can answer this one. By this move, is the Minister signaling a shift towards state control on capital movement? Madam Speaker, this is a concerning development, given that it has been 30 years since the TT dollar was floated and those types of controls were lifted, Madam Speaker. In essence, this means both organizations and individuals may lose autonomy over their rightfully earned US currency. Now, while the Minister may view this as a solution to increasing foreign exchange supplies, there are those who feel that that approach is just Forex gun talk. But, Madam Speaker, I want the Minister to be very clear on what he means by that. Does he mean that when my supplier or my customer in the United States wires funds to my US account here in Trinidad, will I have control on my US currency to decide what I do with it? Or does the Minister mean that when the US currency comes into the central bank, it is held, and then I will get the TT value and I have no access to my US currency? I want the Minister to be very, very clear on that particular issue. Madam Speaker, very quickly on the issue of foreign direct investment, the Minister's claim that Trinidad and Tobago stands as an investment haven in the Caribbean, it contradicts the stark reality of dwindling foreign direct investments under this PNM administration. And I have the data for that. Madam Speaker, until 2015, our country was the regional FDI magnet. We peaked in 2014 at US $1.5 billion US. However, the situation has dramatically reversed. Data from Microtrends, Madam Speaker, which is an online platform which provides in-depth analysis into various global economic and business trends, they have put us on a downward trend, Madam Speaker. In July 2023, a report from the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean revealed that the net FDI outflow of US $914 million US dollars in 2022 worsened to a net outflow of US $778 million in the year after. Madam Speaker, that showed a 174% decline from 2020. But you know, the Minister continued to boast about growth in the gross domestic product. But he did not indicate that Trinidad and Tobago is moving at the slowest pace in the Caribbean. And why do I say that, Madam Speaker? The latest ECLAC report projects our GDP to expand by 3.2% this year and 2.2% next year. Those two projections are primarily based on our energy product. The very same report, Madam Speaker, indicates that Suriname is the only Caribbean country that would grow slower than Trinidad and Tobago. Every other country, including Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, all of them, according to this ECLAC report, Madam Speaker, is expected to have higher GDP growth this year, according to ECLAC. How we were the tiger in a sea of pussycats, Madam Speaker, and now we are running at the back of the lane. all of this means, Madam Speaker, is that the Trinidad and Tobago economy is sputtering like an old motorcycle. The economy that once stood head and shoulders above all else in the region is now lagging behind. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Trade spoke about market access. And I just want to mention quickly this issue on market access. The Minister mentioned the partial scope agreements with Chile and Curacao, but Minister failed to elucidate on the tangible benefits occurred from prior trade accords with Panama, Cuba, Costa Rica, and the Dominican Republic. What measurable outcomes all of these agreements have yielded. So it's one thing to come to the House and talk about all these trade agreements, but not place on the record how it has benefited Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Perhaps Honourable Minister will spend some time on that in the other place. Madam Speaker, procurement. The Minister's portrayal, this is the Finance Minister, of the government's procurement legislation as pioneering and effective stands in stark contrast to the empirical reality, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in the 2015 election manifesto of the People's National Movement, they committed to properly addressing the pressing issues by instituting a modern, fair, equitable, and transparent procurement system. But contrary to this pledge, Madam Speaker, the government had to basically be forced into getting this procurement legislation into action. But you know what is the P for me, Madam Speaker? With the number of issues, and I think the Minister of Local Government referred to it today, with the issues surrounding the stagnation of the workflow because of the procurement legislation. The minister, the local government minister today, Madam Speaker, attempted to throw blame on the procurement regulator and said that it was he who advised them that everything was ready. Everything was ready. Madam Speaker, this is how I does operate in my business. I have some of the smartest people working for me. But when we have to make a decision, I want the reporter, and I want to read the report myself before we make a decision. How come? And this is why I feel a bit disturbed that the contracting environment in the public service is around 35,000 contractors who, in their real mind and real sense, would tell their boss, in this term is the Minister of Finance, that we're ready, when only 1,100 contractors were registered in the depository. Madam Speaker, that in itself was illogical. I don't know who will actually turn a lever knowing fully well that you can have less than 1% of your contractors in the repository registered, but then you will go and you will execute and proclaim the legislation. And then when everything runs to a standstill, we cry and we come and we write up negative and positive resolutions which we brought to the Parliament. And then now today, we blame the procurement regulator himself. Madam Speaker, an editorial in the Express dated July 15, 2023, pointedly noted that the diluted legislation is virtually unrecognizable from the law initially presented to Parliament. Madam Speaker, this too aligns with the observation that we have made here on this side of the House, looking at the fact that the law was being altered to facilitate increased expenditure devoid of procurement standards, effectively creating yet another conduit to evade accountability. And that is where we pass legislation to remove work under the value of $1 million from the eyes of the Procurement Office, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to touch quickly on another issue that the Minister spoke on in his delivery on Friday on city redevelopment.
Honourable Member for Mayaro, your original time is now spent. You have 10 more minutes to continue with your contribution if you so wish.
Speaker.
Please proceed.
Yes, Madam Speaker. And the reason why I want to touch on city redevelopment, it is because of the impact it has on business and the issue that crime is having on business, Madam Speaker. While the Minister talked about the redevelopment of Port of Spain, he sidestepped the grim reality that the city itself, our capital city, is grappling with escalating crime. This surge in lawlessness, Madam Speaker, is compelling, long-lasting, and it has caused multi-generational businesses to abandon Port of Spain. Madam Speaker, to emphasize the gravity of the situation, Gregory Aboud, the president of the Downtown Owners and Merchants Association, DOMA, he himself is at the epicenter of this crisis. A newspaper article dated 30th of July 2022, Mr. Aboud is quoted as saying, "The high level of crime in the country's capital is causing businesses to flee Port of Spain." He further added that aside from a handful of major establishments, most businesses in Port of Spain are also situated elsewhere, and many buildings within the city are up for sale. Madam Speaker, we do not dispute the value of modernizing our capital city. However, the safety of those businesses and the investors, their owners, their customers, and the tourists alike must be very important to the state in making a safe environment that will augur well for our city development, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I will use the last few minutes I have to deal with some of the issues that the constituency of Mayaro continues to be affected with. It is no different from what my colleagues would have said earlier on. Madam Speaker, we continue in the Mayaro constituency to be hampered by water distribution issues. We continue to be hampered by a damaged road network infrastructure, both at the major highways and the secondary road level. We continue to be having to grapple with issues of flooding every time that the rain falls, and it could be for a very quick high-intensity shower on a morning, and within 2 hours there are reports of heavy flooding causing damages to people's homes. But Madam Speaker, there are some other issues that I want to raise that, I think it's important that we talk about. Madam Speaker, I have in the constituency, and we did a table of our requests that we submit for grants and so on for our constituents. And Madam Speaker, as of today, we have 372 self-help applications that have not been addressed as of today. Madam Speaker, a large amount of that is for fire victims. A large amount is for homes that are sitting on the verges of landslips, that we're trying to do remedial work for some of these families, and these applications have not been attended. For NSDP, Madam Speaker, NSDP, we have 154 applications not attended to. For REAP, we have 100 applications not attended to. For HIG, 63 applications not attended to. For HCS, 15 applications not attended to. For HDC, 491 applications that are not being attended to. For ESR, 25 applications. Public lighting, 110 applications. Madam Speaker, sometimes I wonder if it is because of the distance that Mayaro is, the grant seems to be taking a lot longer to get to Mayaro than some of my colleagues opposite. Madam Speaker, one of the challenges, and I know, and I want to put this on record, that while we do have some serious challenges with water, I want to say that the Honourable Minister of Public Utilities have been very active with myself and WASA in trying to determine some key permanent fixes that over time should resolve the problem. I would like to ask the Honourable Minister to help us in the short term by lifting the water trucking facilities, that we can bridge some of that deficit as we go along. During the Standing Finance Committee meeting, Minister, I'll raise some of those matters and hope I'll get the responses at that point in time. But water is critical, and by the time that the resources that are there in Mayaro, or that is dispatched to Mayaro, by the time they make their rounds to government buildings, schools, the hospital, it really puts people who are off the cycle in a very desperate position. Sometimes I have WhatsApp messages, Madam Speaker, from public officers, nurses and so on, complain that they can't wash their uniforms to get to work. And those are real challenges. We have homes with elderly people taking care of elderly parents, and for some time, a week, 2 weeks, no water. And the challenge to go through St. Joseph to get their numbers and so on, it creates a problem. And now the office of the MP and this MP has now become the 1-800 number for WASA. So people are calling me directly, you know, and that is why I tend to not want to frustrate the team at WASA, but I have no choice but to do that at the end of the day. So, Honourable Minister, I look forward to see some improvement in that as we go along. I've had several complaints lately, Madam Speaker, from constituents who go to the welfare office in Rio Claro. And while there are procedures to fill out for different grants and so on, I have several people coming back to the office to speak about the attitude of some of those officers. And sometimes I want to remind these officers in these public offices that people who are coming to your office, the welfare office, they are not in a good state of mind. They are not in a good place. They need help. And your body language, your tone, it really adds more pressure. And if there is one wish that I could have, is that our public officers be a little more empathetic, sympathetic with some of the constituents when they go to the office to make the applications for various grants and so on. Because strangely sometimes, Madam Speaker, I'm amazed that the public officers in the welfare office send them to the MP for I to get a food card and for I to give them, get a grant for them. And I'm saying, but you're the ministry. You are the ministry. Madam Speaker, in critical times, in critical conditions, we will go out of the way to help. Madam Speaker, at times I pay for water trucking services for pensioners. I pay for medication that is not available in CDAP when these old pensioners come to the office, and so MP, I can't get the CDAP and I'm running out of the medication. So the MP office does make an effort, but we can't be the office of last resort at the end of the day when you have ministries that are designed to deal with those matters. Madam Speaker, with regards to the housing issue, with 400 plus applications, I know I've been asking the Minister of Housing, well, the previous Minister of Housing, we've written the HDC, to consider another, perhaps a housing development in the Rio Claro, Mayaro area. We do have a large middle income pool of professional teachers, police officers and so on, who are living in the community, and having them housed in the community, it augurs well for the predisposition of those services. Madam Speaker, I can tell you police officers who are living in Eastern Division, when they live in the communities that they serve, we get better work from these police officers, Madam Speaker. And it is evident when you see the statistics coming out of Eastern Division. And as we are on that topic, I just want to commend the Rio Claro Police and Eastern Division for the work they've done in terms of capturing the killer of the Lalan family, the young lady and her father, and the quick time that it took to get them to the court system. So they must be congratulated for that, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, we continue to live in hope. We continue to look after the best interests of our constituents. We will continue to bring the issues up to the parliamentary level. We'll continue to work with all the ministers. I will continue to work with my colleagues across the floor as we continue to serve the people in the best interests of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.